Welcome back, everyone. We are so excited to be in Arizona today, our state number 42, and we are back to discussing education because, as I like to say, education is the foundation of everything. When I was in government, I had the opportunity to work with a number of individuals across academic institutions, teachers, administrators, and even nonprofit folks. And what we were able to do was redesign the U.S. education system. And one of the individuals that I worked with is here with us today. And so we're going to be talking about how education can help the country, can help our people, not just our young people, but all the way across the lifetime, and what some of the latest research is. So I will turn it to you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
Thank you. So I'm Dr. Scotty Craig. I'm trained, as you know, but I'm trained as a cognitive psychologist. But my area of focus is in the area of educational research and that intersection of educational research where it actually blends into technology. So how can we actually use technology to address the limitations of human cognition?
Wow. So some people worry when they hear technology, that we think we should have technology in schools everywhere all the time and that we should replace teachers. Is that what we're finding in the research?
So could we replace teachers? I don't think that we can. That's not what the research is showing. You do hear that from time to time, but usually that's just somebody bringing up a point to raise the fear of it. In no way is technology going to replace teachers. Now, what it could do is actually help teachers. It'll be able to help them by taking off some of the mundane tasks, such as grading potentially. It will be able to help them as far as identifying when students may need specific problems, have specific problems and need help. So it will basically be there more of an assistant to the teacher, not as a replacement of the teacher.
I'm pretty sure every teacher would love to have an assistant.
Yes, probably, yes. And actually a lot of students would love to have an assistant that would be there for them when they need it, just in time. Because realistically, as we see class sizes growing and growing and growing, which is what happens across the country.
Sure.
One teacher cannot meet the needs of all of those students.
No.
Especially when you get above 30 students.
Wow.
It's almost impossible for one human to have that bandwidth.
Yeah, I used to joke that whenever we had another child, we should get an extra arm because there was no way as one mom that you could take care of more than 2 kids. And it's the same thing for teachers. You almost wish they got an extra assistant every 10 kids.
Yeah, exactly. And that's about right. I mean, you kind of need that kind of level of help.
Yeah.
And we can't do that with people. It gets too expensive way too fast.
Yeah.
But we can with technology. But the technology has to be built in a way that we can trust it. So you have to actually worry about the teacher trusting the data that is coming to them from the technology, and the students trusting the technology also. If that triangle is broken at any point, the system breaks down also, and actually is a barrier to learning.
Yeah. So how do we build trust between people and technology?
So there's how do we do that? One way of doing that, and actually there's a huge line of research on that right now, and we're still trying to figure this out. So, but building trust, one, you have to actually build up interpersonal trust. So you actually have to have people interact with the technology, understand what the technology's strengths are, and understand what its limitations are, and then actually experience that. So you need that pre-training with the technology to set the expectations. And when you do that, then you build the trust. But otherwise, if you just throw the technology into the classroom and say, here it is, what happens, the teacher is fearful to use it because they don't want to impact the students' learning. And the students don't understand what the system is that has been given to them. It's just an extra thing on top of what they have to learn. So it actually increases it overloads them instead of helping them where it could help them. And even a perfect system, a perfect learning technology can cause that without that level of trust being established.
Interesting. So we see something very similar actually in VA hospitals that are starting to implement telehealth. So a lot of folks don't realize that we're testing a lot of delivery methods in healthcare, and one of them is you can check it out at healthcare.va.gov. And one of the things they found in the human-centered design space was that the doctors were nervous about using the technology, and so they were just putting it aside and not using it. And so the government actually hired designers to come in and educate them on just trusting how to work with it, and then doing the same thing with patients. And so now they actually have a kit to build technology understanding. Actually, it was a cool project, and they found a huge improvement in people keeping their appointments, and doctors. Well, it was two things they were trying to learn. One was just comfort in using the system, but the second was in figuring out the system could be used for different things. So you needed to have somebody face to face if you were going to physically interact, right? If you had to test them for something. But if you were just giving test results, or you were just checking in, you could actually reduce the amount of time for yourself and for your patient by just checking with them through telehealth, through the program. And once they figured that balance out, it made a huge difference. So I think it would be really interesting if we saw that more with teachers as well. If we took the time to design the whole system, not just the technology. Is that starting to happen?
Yeah. So, and we are starting to do that. One example of that, especially a direct analogy from the idea of the telehealth, coming with teachers, we're starting to see a lot of systems start build what we refer to as dashboards. So it is actually educational dashboards. So it's that same idea for telehealth, where you can actually, the system then saves all this data on the students for the teachers to very quickly be able to get to and understand. Visually, they can look at it, and it allows them to directly connect to the students. Now, this is really useful. This is useful in in-person, face-to-face classes, but it's almost essential as we move to online classes, because one thing that you lose is that face-to-face quality. So if the teacher at least is in the classroom with the student every day, they will be able to see the student at least. So they'll kind of know if they're suffering, even if they can't maybe interact with all 30 of them. They could start picking out the ones that seem like they need the most help. Right. Online, you can't do that. So these dashboards actually kind of have started to be designed to help teachers identify their students.
Very cool, very cool. Now, as a psychologist, one thing that comes to my mind is we can, in some students, see that they're starting to struggle, and that other students are particularly good at hiding it. What can the technology tell us about some of those students who maybe are not showing it, but are having some internal struggles?
So actually you're 100% right in that, because one thing we know with face-to-face, in studies that have been done with teachers, even expert teachers, when they are trying to determine if students are highly engaged or bored and starting to disengage, they're at chance.
Right, well.
And that's when you put them into larger and larger classrooms. So one-on-one, they can figure it out, and when they're smaller. But when they get large, they lose that ability pretty fast because we can't monitor that much. It is a cognitive overload. But again, when we come to technologies, technology can start to detect that. So we have built interactive technologies that can detect affect. So the research area has been going for about 20 years on that. That is one of those areas that is prime to make that jump into classrooms and large-scale areas, but it hasn't been done yet, primarily due to the lack of funding and research that needs to be done in that area. But we can actually have systems that will automatically detect. So we can predict boredom, we can predict confusion, we can predict the beginnings of frustration, which can be flagged for teachers and humans to step in, or even for a computer to step in to give some initial just-in-time feedback to re-engage the student or to help clear up the confusion.
So what is holding back getting that to what we call scale, right? Which is not from one person, but to a whole classroom.
So there have been some studies that have moved it from one person to classroom-based. So what's holding it back? The first thing that was holding it back was the reliability of the technology. But there have been some amazing work done in those areas. Right now, it's primarily, I hate to say it, it's one of those general things you run into with educational research, it's money. It is funding and resources, so the schools don't have the resources to implement this.
Yeah.
The researchers don't have the resources or often the skills to scale up into those classrooms.
Right.
So there still needs to be this idea of these research teams and the funding and support that goes with it. So that's what's and that's what's kind of preventing that area from going forward right now.
And I love the point you're making because it helps clarify for people. A lot of folks say, there's a federal government, there's a state government, and then there are communities deciding on their school systems. And they said school and education should be decided within the community. Fair.
Yeah.
But if you want to progress, there are these pieces like you're mentioning here where no community would have the funding for that full-scale implementation. And because of that, it ends up getting the research that exists and the knowledge that we have doesn't end up being, all it has to be is connected, but you have to have the funding to connect it. And that's when it rolls up to the state level, and that's when it rolls up to the federal level, and it says the entire country would benefit when we are able to connect across states and people and researchers, because we get the best ideas to come together. And that's essentially what we did when we were working on Modernizing Learning. Right? It was recognizing there are different solutions and everyone's working on them. But I remember I said to my boss, I said, here's the thing. We have experts in building pistons, and we have experts in building steering wheels, and we have experts in building the body of a car, but we don't have the blueprint for a car. And without that, we lose transportation. And he goes, oh. I said, so what's happened is we have all this research, and people feel like, well, it doesn't get implemented, but it's because we have to connect it. And that's hard to do.
It is.
It's really hard.
And the reason why, for researchers, we like to really understand a piece.
Sure.
And so researchers, we tend to focus as educational researchers. Either on this one human piece, this technology piece. And sometimes you'll get somebody who kind of stands in the center and focuses at that intersection. But it is hard to get that larger team that focuses on everything from humans up to technology, the interaction between the two, and then looking at that larger system. And really how is it that the human needs, the technology needs, can get worked into that larger learning organization and learning setting. So what was your... It takes different skills.
Right, it takes different skills. And so what did you observe when we have all these, because that's what we did, right? We brought all these researchers in. It was a little chaotic, I'm not going to lie. What did you see happening when you saw everybody coming from these different disciplines?
I like the fact that you refer to it as chaotic.
It was very chaotic.
It was chaotic, but it was actually...
I know my lessons learned.
So it was chaos, but it wasn't full chaos. So it was. So again, from my perspective. So yes, everybody started going to their own directions. And everybody was advocating for their piece and how their piece is important. And eventually, I'm thinking about one meeting that we had where people literally went to their own corners. Initially, you had all these 30, 40 people in this room, experts in their areas, and they looked around and there were things on the walls, and people instantly just went to what they gravitated towards, and then those people started talking to each other. But the great thing about that was by the second day of that event, they weren't there anymore. So if you get people around, so originally people always want to group. But as they become familiar with each other, it comes right back to the idea of building trust. So once they got trust to know each other, they actually started to share ideas more. So while it seemed very chaotic in the beginning, by the end, that group of people actually, because they realized and came to trust that they all cared about the same ideas and they had different pieces, they started to share it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why, like, with the book which you mentioned, Modernizing Learning, I think that's why it came together so well, is because by the end of those events, everybody was kind of on the same page. They felt like they'd had their voice heard.
Yeah.
Or at least they felt like they trusted the other people.
Yeah.
Enough to actually, like, listen to them later if they didn't get heard then.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you're getting to that I also observed is it's very hard with researchers who deep dive in one space to let go of all the intricacies.
Yep.
But once it rolled up to a joint goal, it was easier for people to focus on, this is the part of my research that helps this greater piece. This other part of my research I'm still working on, so it's maybe not what we focus on in this space.
Yeah.
That is actually a very big transition for researchers.
Yes, it is. And that's really requiring researchers really to step out of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we don't like to step out of their comfort zones. We that's why we're there. Because the thing with research, I mean, as you know, is that most researchers are not there because it's just a job. They are there because they are passionate about understanding those items, those pieces, and they really want to be able to understand those pieces because they think that it could actually help to improve people's lives.
That's right.
And that's why they're doing it.
Yeah.
And that's why they focus so much. But sometimes when we focus so much, we lose the large broader picture, and we need people who can pull us out of that.
It was that nobody knew they were walking into an experiment. It was funny when I was pitching the idea to my innovation boss, and they said, "You're going to write a book? That's not really innovative." And I said, this is going to be a different kind of book, and I can't take people from step 1 to step 10. I'm going to push them to 3, and that actually is going to be a big change, because what we didn't do in that book is what we typically do, right? Where each chapter is independent.
Yeah.
We had to wrestle with every single researcher.
Yeah. I don't know how you managed that. It was pretty amazing.
It was actually really challenging because everybody did have their own stick in the game, and they as researchers, our work is us. This is a creation, and now you're asking me to change my creation, so I have to approve every single change because it still has to be true to my values, my beliefs, my research, my being. So, yeah, it was actually really challenging, but I think everybody at the end, at least we got really good feedback, was, oh, now I see. There wasn't an attempt to change anyone's position. It was actually intended to achieve a greater goal. But yeah, it's something we don't see done actually ever. I don't think.
It is pretty rare.
Yeah.
That you see those types of events. That was one of the best things and most exciting things for me about being part of that book.
Even though we were all struggling.
At first, I was infuriated, and then I started. And once I finally stepped back and started realizing and seeing what was going on, I'm like, okay, wait, I get this.
Yeah.
But you have to have that mindset change.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And again, we also realize that emotions are going to play a role in everything.
Yes, that was my role, was to bring out my psychology skills.
Yes, exactly. I mean, again, if I actually go back, I don't often, so much in the educational technology research realm, I don't get to bring in my psychology role as much anymore. But every once in a while, I get to remind myself I am trained as a psychologist.
It is funny. It required us all to grow, so I do feel like it was innovative. And at the end, they did say, okay, I see the vision.
Yeah.
But it took internally as well some wrestling to help people see that this is actually, while we used a book, it was to create a safe space that everybody's familiar with.
Exactly.
It was not that we were going to do it the same way we always do. Yeah. And so I think to kind of tie a bow around all of this, what do you think then is possible from an education perspective if we are able to encourage researchers to feel that trust factor to do system change? I think it is universally accepted at every layer, and I'm talking from companies to the layperson, the system has to change.
Yeah.
So we've taken the first step and laid out this blueprint. Paint the picture of what's possible if we can enact it.
Yeah. So again, we have this pretty amazing, and so you say the book, the book is not innovative. The process of creating the book is not innovative. well, the process actually was innovative, but
The
a
process.
book seems kind of boring, but it's not. And I want to actually say that now. That's the academic in me. Books are exciting. But what was laid out in there is actually was what was truly innovative. So you actually have in one place in a very readable form and easy to digest form, which is another great thing about the book. It removed it forced a lot of academic ideas into, out of the academic realm into a digestible realm.
Yeah.
But what we get from that is this idea of the different pieces that are needed. So we understand where we came from, and a lot of kind of the baggage that was attached to this idea of distributed learning as we try to modernize it. We understand the different pieces within modernizing, the path of modernizing learning. So what are the technologies that we need? So how then on top of those technologies, how do you get them to connect to each other and talk to each other with things such as XAPI and other types of standards? Those standards can then, once they're implemented, can then go directly to those dashboards like we were talking about earlier, and feed into that and actually get feedback to the teacher or to the administrators above that. And thus, that actually allows for trust to start to be built between them. And through the students within the class, they get that same level of feedback and that same level of transparency. It starts to empower them.
Yeah.
So now they're not just waiting for a teacher to give them information. They know where they're struggling. They have direct feedback, and they may even be able to get some personalized information from the system, if it's built correctly, that will help to empower them to do the search themselves. Mm-hmm. So instead of waiting for a teacher to help, they do it themselves. And then they may go back to the teacher for assistance or verification that what they did was correct. So that is where, what we're moving towards. And that, I'm talking about it more in a traditional K-12 or higher education setting, but that same idea transfers to corporate. It transfers to the public sector also.
Right. Yeah. I mean, imagine a world where you have to change careers.
Yes.
And you need to go in and learn something new by not having to go to a classroom constantly.
Yes.
And I know ASU does, and other universities around Michigan does a lot, California is doing a lot, New Hampshire is doing a lot. There's all these schools that are starting to come out with opportunities. I know Georgia Tech is doing one where it's like a $10,000 master's. And so you mix online and in person so that it's cost effective, realistic, but you can still work your job when you're trying to transition to a new one. And being able to have these technologies for those older populations is going to be important, because nobody's going to be able to go back and do a $200,000 bachelor's repeat at 40, again at 55, again at 62. We're going to have some changes coming.
And that was actually, and just an example of that, at the most recent iFest conference. They were actually talking about the idea of mini masters.
Yes.
So, and that's basically rapid reskilling in an area.
Yeah.
And it's about a year program that people can do like very quickly while still working another job online.
I love it.
And it's a wonderful, amazing idea that allows people to either upskill, to get skills, improve in their current position, or if they're stuck in a position that may very likely be going away in a few years potentially.
Right.
They can reskill, take what they know, find an area that is similar enough to what they do, and relearn.
Wow. It's going to be important because nobody's going to want to restart at the bottom.
You can't. It's not realistic. I mean, if you think about having somebody who's, they've been in a job, so maybe they got a degree, undergraduate level or even master's. They worked a job for 15 years. They're, now they're in like their 40s, early to mid 40s, and they have to change careers. It's unrealistic to expect them to go back. We have to have these rapid experiences, but the technology these online learning experiences with this type of supportive technology will allow them to be able to retool quickly, especially if we start focusing on other things such as competencies. So we take the skills that they already learned from their previous college skills they've learned on the job, if we can find ways of giving them credit for that, so that when they go into these new skills, they can say, hey, I have this, give proof of it. And then they don't have to waste time relearning that material.
I love it. I love it. This is going to help a lot with automation coming.
It will, yeah.
It will. Great.
It really will. And especially, yeah, that's the specter in the room that I didn't mention. Automation is coming.
Yes, it is. And so we need to prep for it. So
yes.
I'm so excited that folks like you and so many around the country are coming up with the solutions. We just have to tie them together.
Yeah. And just to give kind of a personal, example of like how this can actually help empower.
Right.
So in the previous project that I worked on, looking at incorporating learning technologies within this was actually a 6th grade setting.
Yeah.
So we actually created an after-school math program.
Okay.
We randomized students to either interact with master teachers, certified math teachers. They got taught by them, or an intelligent tutoring math program. So this is just a system that basically would teach them everything they needed for 6th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade math. It determined their competencies, what they knew, what they were ready to learn, and it gave them feedback and it walked them through it.
Okay.
So what is this power that technology has there? One thing to say is that in the end of that program, we actually did find that the tutoring system is actually just as effective as the expert teachers, which is really exciting. So the effect size was actually slightly in favor of the teachers. So the teachers actually did a little bit better. But again, they were teaching 30 to 40 students in a classroom.
Yeah.
So we didn't give them small little classrooms. We gave them larger, realistic classrooms like they would normally have to deal with.
Yeah.
But the interesting part about this was that there was one student I remember from this class who was in one of my technology-led classrooms. So the teacher who was overseeing it, and all the teacher did was basically they sat there and they helped the students some. But it came to me as like, you have to remove this student. He's disruptive. He won't work with the system. All he's doing is making problems. And I was like, okay, well, let me talk to him. I mean, I was just the researcher there visiting the school, but I was, let me talk to him. So I went and talked to him. I was like, so how are you doing? So are there problems? What's going on? And he was trying to talk to me, and I very quickly realized that English was not his first language. And I asked him, his first language is actually Spanish. And the system actually had a Spanish feature. So I flipped it to the Spanish feature, and I was like, here, is this better? And he was like, and he was so amazed. And he transformed from actually being one of the worst, most disruptive students in the class to one of the most productive, best students in the class. And it's all because, again, with technology, you can easily transition, make those types of transitions that you can't do, that teachers can't do as easily.
Right.
And by the way, that student, not only did they do really well in that program, other new students got moved into his classroom and didn't know how to use the Alex system. And he moved from his and started helping those other students.
Nice.
In English. So it actually gave him the confidence, it empowered him with the confidence to talk to them. Because it wasn't he didn't speak English, he just wasn't confident in it.
Yeah.
So it empowered him. And he actually then made those connections with students. So again, technology indirectly sometimes can be used to make these social connections. And they all improved because of that.
Wow,
So,
that's a great story.
yeah.
That is really great. Well, thank you so much for joining us.